Welcome back, it's Chrissy at Pinovate. This tutorial is for our super cute family birthday board. You get to paint it, sand it, pick your colors, add the months on top, and add your birthdays wherever you need. There's also some little hearts in there for special anniversaries or special days that you want to celebrate. So grab all your kit, we'll go through the supplies and then we'll get started. All right, so let's go through all of the pieces in your kit. There's a lot to go through and it's a lot of fun to put together. So you are going to get some sandpaper because that is very important when you are working with wood. You're going to get your flat backing board for your calendar. You're going to get 6 slats. That's how we create the shiplap look across the front. You're going to get your selection of paint, so you get to pick your colors, a sponge brush, a makeup sponge, some circles and hearts that you get to put on your calendar wherever you need, some vinyl decals for your months across the top. The only other things you're going to need will be a ruler and some masking tape. This will help out a lot in placement. And that's it. So grab all your supplies and we'll get going. When we're working with wood, we always want to make sure that we prep our wood before we get started. And with that, we are going to sand all of our pieces. So I just want to make sure that there's no scuffs or splinters or anything on any of my pieces here. And I'm just going to give it a quick little sand, make sure everything is smooth and soft to the touch before we get going with our paint. So obviously when you are sanding, you're going to get some dust on your pieces. So what I'm gonna do is just give it a quick little wipe. I just have a paper towel. You could use a baby wipe. I just wanna make sure that that dust is gone before we start painting and it doesn't mix in with my paint. I'm ready to paint now. My wood is all prepped. So I'm gonna grab my sponge brush and my paint. Before we get going, just think about what pieces you want which color. So you could paint the backboard its own color, the slats a different color, the circles a different color, and the hearts a different color. So if you wanted this to be very colorful, you can absolutely do that. You could also make it very neutral toned. You could have the background and the slats the same color. You could do ombre shades on your circles and hearts, whatever you want. So whatever you've decided, go ahead and grab that paint and your sponge brush. Okay, so for my board, I have decided I'm going to do a light gray and a dark gray on my back and on my slats. So if your kit comes with gray, that's a perfect place to start. Your kit may also come with white and black and you'll have to mix your gray, which again gives you a whole array of shades that you can work with. So the easiest way to mix gray is to start with white. You can tint white more easily with black than to go the opposite way. You'll end up having to add so much white, it's not gonna work. So start with white and add a very, very small amount of black in there and see where that gets you. See if that gets you to a gray that you like. So I'm actually gonna go lighter first and then I'm gonna tint it darker afterwards. I'm just gonna use the same paint and just add a bit of black for my slats after. So this is a good gray. I'm liking this. So I'm gonna use this gray for my board. And then to do my slats, like I said before, I'm just going to add a drop of black to tint it slightly darker and give the slats a slightly different shade. So you can do this with any color. So say you wanted to do pink, all you have to do is add a little bit of white to lighten it, and then you have 2 different shades of pink, or blue, or purple, or green, however you want to make your board. All right, so I have my gray, and I'm gonna start with this on my backboard. So nice and easy to paint. You're going to take your sponge brush, take a little dip right on the tip there, and you're going to go all the way back and forth on your board until there's no more paint in your brush. Sponge brushes do hold paint on them, so there might be, if you give it a little squish, some paint's gonna come out. Just keep using that until you have no more paint, and then go back in and get some more. Try and do a nice, flat, even coat first, and then once it is fully covered, you can go ahead and do a second coat. It's important that it is flat. The flatter the paint, the faster it'll dry, the more evenly a second coat will go on. You'll also notice that when you're painting on wood, it has a tendency to absorb moisture. So this paint is going to kind of get absorbed into the wood. If you find it tricky, you can also add just a drip of water to it. That'll help stretch the paint a little bit further. But there's no necessary need to do that. It's gonna cover beautifully anyway. So go ahead and make your first coat on there, and then I'll see you back in a minute. So I finished one coat on my board and I painted my edges to make sure that it has a nice finished look. So an option for you is if you kind of like the farmhousey weathered look, you could leave this with one coat. You can still see some of the wood grain through. And then once this is fully dry, you can actually take your sandpaper, go over it, and then you'll actually get to see streaks of that wood through there a little bit more. So if you like that look, that is an option. I'm gonna paint mine solid though. I'm just gonna make it nice and crisp and clean. So if you wanna go solid, you're just gonna wait till this dries. That's very important. Make sure that everything is dry to the touch, and then you can go ahead and do a second coat. I finished 2 coats on my board, and just remember that it's going to dry darker. So just let it dry before you put on any more coats so you can actually see what it's going to look like. So while this is drying, I'm going to mix my next shade for the slats. So I have the gray that I was using before, and I'm just going to tint this just a hair darker, just so it's still gray, but it's just a slightly different shade. So I'm gonna add just maybe a little bit of black, tiny little bit, and mix that up. So still gray, just a darker shade, and then it's gonna give it a little bit more depth when I put those slats on the board. Need it just a little bit darker, so maybe 2 more drops here. All right, almost there, a couple more drops. So you're better to do it adding small drops at a time rather than a whole bunch, because if you over tint it, you can't take it back very easily. It's a little bit tricky. So just adding a little bit at a time until you get that shade that you want. All right, I like that shade. It is definitely darker than my board there. So while my board is now drying, I'm just gonna move this out of the way and I'm gonna start on my slats. So you are going to have 6 slats for half of the months. The front part we've already sanded, so we're good to paint this. And then the back has 3 ends. So this is actually a double-sided adhesive, which is going to stick to the board after. So once you are ready, you have your color prepared, you can go ahead and paint just like we did before. I would allow it to dry 1 coat and then add a second one. So I have finished 1 coat on my slats here. Just a note, if you happen to get paint on the edge, just give it a quick wipe right away before it dries. If it happens to dry, that's not a big deal. What you can do is actually take your sandpaper once it's fully dry and just sand that paint off, and it'll just blend in. So no worries about that. I finished 2 coats on my slats, so I'm just gonna set them aside and let them dry. But in the meantime, I'm going to prep my paint and my makeup sponge to do our hearts and our circles. So I'm going to be doing white and pink, and I'm just gonna prep my paint and grab my makeup sponge. We are ready to paint our little shapes. Now, because they are such a small piece of wood to work with, it's tricky to hold them and then use your brush. It kind of makes a bit of a mess, so we're gonna use our makeup sponge. This makes it a little bit easier. It's a nice way to paint smaller objects. So the back of my makeup sponge here, I'm gonna hold it at the tip, at the triangle, so I have the flat piece on the bottom. And I'm going to do my circles white, and I'm going to do my hearts pink. Pink is my favorite color. So I'm going to do a little dab into my white first, but I only need a tiny bit of paint, so I'm actually gonna dab most of that off. So the trick here is to build this paint up in layers rather than putting a whole bunch on at once. So with my makeup sponge, instead of brushing back and forth like a brush, I'm actually just going to be dabbing it directly up and down, and that places the paint right on top of the wood. And it is such a thin coat that it dries really, really quickly. So that means I can do several coats relatively quickly on these. So I'm gonna keep working with my white. There's one coat. I'm just gonna keep going. Again, just a tiny little bit of paint. Dab it off before you start. It's always easier to add more paint than it is to take it off. So again, just a tiny bit of paint. Bounce it up and down. Dab, dab, dab. So once I have one coat on all of my circles there, I'm gonna go back to my first one. And because it was such a thin coat, it dries really, really quickly. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a second coat. All right, so I've done 2 coats, it's looking good, but because it's white, I want it to be really, really crisp. So I'm gonna go ahead and do 3 coats on these. Just something to think about. With your circles on your hearts, it would be easiest if they are a lighter color or a lighter shade. They're easier to write on if you have a fine tip Sharpie. However, if you wanted to do them dark, like a dark blue or a black, that's totally fine. You would just need to get a white Sharpie or even a chalk marker, something that is white and substantial that you could write onto the dark background. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your colors, but I'm gonna go ahead and do my 3rd coat on here. All right, I have 3 coats on there, and I'm just gonna let those dry, and I'm gonna move on to my cutie little pink hearts. While my circles and hearts are drying, I'm gonna move back to my board and my slats now. So I'm going to assemble these. So I have my board. This has to be completely 100% dry along with my slats. Everything must be dry before we move on. Okay, so the only other thing right now is you're going to need your masking tape for this part. Okay, so it may not make sense the way that I'm laying it out, but by the time we get to the end, you'll see it all come together. So what is really good is these slats actually measure the equal space in between each other. So it is also a measuring tool. So everything lines up perfectly. I'm gonna need a piece of tape here. I'm gonna pick a nice big piece of tape. And I'm going to start with my first slat on the very corner, on the top and bottom, and I'm gonna tape that in place. I'm actually not sticking it down because I don't want it to stay on the board. I just need this as like a placeholder to know where my next one goes. Okay, so I'm just taping it down on the corner there. It doesn't have to be too fancy. It has to be flush on the edge on the left as well as flush on the top, right in the corner. And we're just gonna tape that down so it doesn't move. Okay, so that's gonna just be, this is going to be used as my measuring tool in between each slat, and then at the very end, it gets its place. So right now, it's just my working tool. So my second slat here, this I'm actually going to line up right beside, and this is where it's going to get stuck down. So our slats have 3M adhesive on the back. All we have to do is peel this off, and it's going to adhere directly onto the board. So something that makes it work a little bit easier, I like to use a little tool, or if you have a toothpick, just to get that corner started. And once that's peeled off, I'm going to place it directly against my placeholder, as well as flush to the top to make sure that I have the right position for, this will be my February slat here. Once it's in place, I'm going to press that down. Make sure it's stuck on my board. And then now I'm going to move my place marker over so I can peel this off. And I have nicely spaced slats so far. This is going to go right beside this one, nice and flush. Flush to the top, and I'm just going to tape that down so it doesn't move, and continue the whole way across. Okay, so I have all of my other slats stuck onto my board. This placeholder is actually the very, very last one, so now I'm able to stick this one down. So I'm gonna peel this up, take off my tape, and now this slat gets stuck at the very end, right against the edge. So you still have equal spacing in between. There we go. So I have a fully slotted board. I am ready to put my months right across the top. I am ready to put my months on the top of my board. However, I want to make sure that they are all lined up. So this is where your ruler is going to come in handy. So for me, this is definitely personal preference. I know that I kind of want to keep these up to the top. So I know for me, my preference would be about 1 1/4 inches down. And then the bottom of the letters are going to sit right on that line. So I am going to mark off 1 1/4 on this side with a pencil, and then 1 1/4 on the other side with a pencil, just so I know how far down they are. So I have 1 1/4 right there. That can be erased after. And then I have 1 1/4 right here. So I know that that whole line straight across is going to line up. Okay, so once I have this lined up, I'm gonna use my tape. This is going to be like my grid marker where those letters are going to line up. So I'm just gonna make a great big long strip and place it starting one side to the other, making sure it's all lined up. There we go. And then that is my place marker for where my letters are going to sit. This is going to be right where the letters are marked. So what I'm gonna do really quickly, just so that the tape, you see how it's like floating above that backboard there? I actually want it to stick to the backboard so that tape doesn't move. So I have an X-Acto knife. You can use any other tool. If you have a sharp pair of scissors, go right ahead. I'm just gonna slice these edges so that it actually kind of recedes down into where I'm going. Now this part has to be done very, very carefully so you're not cutting your board or scratching your board that you so beautifully painted previously. So I'm just gonna cut this tape very carefully. If you have scissors, you could even do a little snip if you wanted. I just find this to be the easiest, quickest way to get everything lined up. Perfect. Now the tape is actually stuck to the top slats as well as the bottom backboard, and they're not moving. Now you're just going to go slat by slat, applying your vinyl to each little section where the month falls. So with your vinyl, you're going to give it a rub, make sure that everything is sticking to that transfer tape, You're going to peel the clear transfer tape and the paper backing apart, and you want all of those little letters to actually stick to the clear transfer tape. That is important. So just take your time. If it's not sticking like that, just give it another rub. You can always flip it down. If you have a card or a edge of a popsicle stick, a butter knife, something that you can use to create some pressure on there, that helps. All right, so I have all my letters, all my vinyl on that transfer tape there. Now I'm going to be placing this right on January, the very first one, and I'm lining up the bottom of the letters to the tape. I'm gonna place it as centered as I can between the left and the right. Okay. Give that a press and a rub. And then carefully peel off that clear transfer tape. If any of those letters are coming off, again, just give a push and a rub down. We want to make sure that it is sticking to your board. All right, and you're just going to continue that pattern the whole way across. Okay, so this is a great lesson in action. So I have actually a piece of my vinyl that came off when I was applying it. All I'm going to do is line it back up because it's great, it's nice and clear, you can see where it's going. All I'm gonna do is line it back up where I need it to be and give it a really good rub down again. Carefully peel that off. And it's on there again. So if that happens, do not freak out. It is fixable in that sense. And then just continue with all the rest of your letters there. Perfect, so all of the months are applied across the top. All we have to do now is take off our masking tape. The very last step is to write down our birthdays and anniversaries or any other special days that you want to celebrate on your board. So again, if you did light colors, you can go ahead and use a fine tip Sharpie and write the dates on them. You just have to put the dates, or if you wanted to write a small name underneath. And then we're going to peel the back and stick it on the month that it belongs. I know Pinovate's birthday is in June, so that'll go up there. And depending on where you want to place them, if it's earlier in the month, you could place it near the top. If it's later in the month, you can place it closer to the bottom. Completely up to you, or if you just wanted to have a whole bunch of August birthdays, that works too, however you want to do it. Thank you so much for following along. I hope you enjoyed our family birthday board. It's such a fun project. We would love to see how they turned out. So please tag us in your photos on Instagram at Pinovate and DIY Delivery. And follow us. We're on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, and we're on all the platforms. So give us a like, give us a follow, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.